Hi, my name is Karen Roy. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I have been a T10 paraplegic for 32 years. I was shot in an armed robbery when I was 19. That was in 1987, a long time ago. I was a sophomore at LSU, and my boyfriend and I had gone to a blues place. We were finished. He had played guitar. Went to my car. My car had been broken into in the parking lot, and we didn't know that there were guys with guns outside of the between cars. So someone snuck up from behind me, hit me over the head with the gun. At the same time, someone was on the other side of the car with a gun, and they put the gun to Mike's head. Mike was struggling for control of the gun on that side of the car, so that kid with the gun screamed to his friend, "Shoot him, Dodie, shoot him." So the guy on my side of the car, who already had my purse, my $2, he'd hit me over the head, put the gun in my back point blank at the T10 level, pulled the trigger, and it caused a punctured lung. So I lost 8 units of blood that night. I fought to stay conscious until I got to the hospital. I remember having a chest tube inserted, and I'd rather get shot again, actually, than get another chest tube because it really hurts. Yeah, I was very close to dying, but I knew that they told my parents that if I made it through the first 48 hours that I would be paralyzed from the waist down permanently, and that's fact. That is true. My biggest concern at the time was really that I wanted to be a mom one day, and I wanted to have children. So I remember asking the doctor early in my hospital stay. He said, "You'll never walk again." And I said, "Well, can I still have children?" And he said, "Yes." And that gave me the motivation I needed to carry on with life. I will say that denial is part of that grieving process. It's usually the first stage, and it's a coping mechanism. That's a really good thing. So I probably had a level of denial for 3 years, and I used to tell therapists that I worked with, because when I finished I went back to school. I finished my undergrad in psychology. I got a master's in social work from LSU, and I became a medical social worker. I worked in rehab for 20, off and on for 20 years. And I would tell the therapists that I worked with, they would say, we would be in staffing, and they would say, well, this person is in denial that they think they're going to walk again. And I'm like, that's okay. As long as they do what they're supposed to do in rehab, it's okay to not absorb, "I will never, ever walk again." So I would say that's probably my first piece of advice to therapists is as long as they're participating, because if they don't participate, they have to be discharged. So as long as they're participating and they're learning how to deal with their body in the moment, it's okay that they don't really accept that they'll never walk again. It's totally normal, and you can't really take that away from people too early, because it would be too devastating. So I kept a bicycle that my boyfriend had given me for 3 years, thinking I might ride it again, sometime soon, wake up and just start walking. So, but the good news is, by the time that you accept it, you've realized that, you're going to function. You've figured out a lot of things out, and it's not gonna be, it can be a beautiful life, right? My life is beautiful, crazy, but beautiful. So I think the another thing I wanted to mention in this video is that the length of stay for rehab has shortened dramatically over time. So in 1987, you could stay for 3 months. If you were a quad, you could stay for 6 months. People stayed in rehab a really long time. So now that is cut down to about 2 to 3 weeks average, which is a ridiculous amount of time to try to figure out how to manage your new body the way that it is. Usually if they've been in a car accident, they still have a lot of precautions, and they can't even really participate fully in therapy. So all of that is expected to be done in outpatient now, which makes the job of the social worker, which is what I was, harder, because you've got to get people building a ramp and widening doorways lickety split, because the hospital's not gonna keep them for very long. So back in the day, in 1987, you could learn how to completely do everything by the time you discharge. Like we went out on community outings. I learned how to pop wheelies on a curb, never very well, but get on an escalator with my wheelchair, go up and down an escalator. And also I learned how to drive with hand controls. The OTs there, then they had a car, and I completely had my training for driving with hand controls prior to discharging from the hospital, which is great. And again, all of those things are done in an outpatient setting now. So bowel and bladder is so important. So you obviously you're strengthening your upper body, you're learning to do transfers safely. I remember that I was crying and bleeding and just, you think you're never gonna do it. And then one day, you're 3 minutes and you've got that chair taken apart and put back together again, and in and out of the car like that. So it's a tough process though, and depression and anxiety are high, and you have to manage that while you're trying to get them to stay focused and to stay moving forward. If intermittent catheterization, a lot of people, if you're a paraplegic with good hand dexterity, you're going to learn to intermittent cath yourself. Doing that, cleanly and trying to avoid infection. And then a bowel protocol is key to living a functional and healthy life. They don't, and I tell you, when you tell them that they have to do dig stem, which means, putting on a glove and putting their finger in their butt with a suppository, they are horrified. But if you do that properly and manage it properly, you will never be incontinent of bowel. Now, most people are not incontinent of bowel. It depends on the level of your injury. But I've always, if you can get that process down, you can live a really functional and happy life. And I'll probably go into a little bit more about bowel protocol in the next video. I found the resistance to learning a proper bowel routine was one of my biggest hurdles when I was working in an inpatient setting. And I basically would go in and say, look, yes, I know sounds disgusting that you are going to have to put gloves on, put a suppository in, and then manually remove feces from your body. Occasionally, depends on whether they're constipated or not and that kind of thing. But I was like, the alternative is that you poop yourself. And if you poop yourself all the time, then it makes it hard to, go to the store, get a job, make friends. So, I had to be that blunt about it at times, because people are like, yeah, I am not doing that. I'm like, well, you're gonna be pretty lonely and you're gonna smell bad. So yeah, that's a fact. So that will be part of your job, convincing people that this is a good idea. There are great fact sheets that you can find on University of Alabama, Birmingham, UAB's website with that go into the difference between a flaccid bowel and a reflexive bowel. So at about the T10 level and above, typically people have a reflexive bowel, which means that the sphincter muscle of the anus stays closed unless you stimulate it, and then typically you would have to use like a mini enema or a suppository to cause your bowels to move, and the dig stem also activates those contractions. So that's why it's reflexive, because you put your finger in there, and then the sphincter muscle will react to that, and then also your intestines will start to contract and move the stool down. People that have a lower level injury, so T10, T11, T12, and then the S, those people might have what's called a flaccid bowel, and and everybody's like, no two spinal cord injuries are the same. Everyone's a different level of being like complete or incomplete. Might be worse on the left side or the right, but generally speaking, at those lower levels of the spine, they'll have what's called a flaccid bowel, and the flaccid bowel basically means that the sphincter muscle is never really closed. So they have to do like a frequent bowel evacuation, of manually evacuating feces, and so they have to check a lot more often, because that muscle is not going to close up or stay really in a closed position. So they do have to worry a little bit more about incontinence, and because when they put a suppository in, that is not necessarily going to cause the contractions at that time. So but they just have to check frequently and evacuate the feces, fairly frequently. So that's the difference between reflexive or flaccid bowels, and you can read more about that. I think what people think is like you got shot or paralyzed, you were in a car accident, whatever the case may be, and that the worst thing about it is being in a wheelchair. There's a lot more that's fairly horrifying when it comes to like bowel and bladder. And I know a lot of people that are paralyzed that are like, if I could get one thing back, it would be like I would be able to have a normal bowel movement, or empty my bladder. So anyway, this is segment 1 of a series of videos that I'm going to be doing with you guys today. So this is the end of segment 1, and I will see you in a minute.